Olá, bem-vindas e bem-vindos. Eu sou a Mariana Almeida e este é o McKinsey Talks, direto do estúdio da McKinsey em São Paulo. Uma das mudanças mais visíveis na vida profissional pós-pandemia são as novas expectativas quanto à evolução de carreira. Hoje, a força de trabalho espera por muito mais oportunidades de desenvolvimento, além de flexibilidade, segurança psicológica e propósito. Uma pesquisa recente da McKinsey mostrou que 1/3 da força de trabalho planeja sair do seu emprego nos próximos 6 meses. Com anseios diferentes, os líderes também vão precisar mudar de perspectivas e encontrar novos paradigmas. E aproveitando a época de Copa do Mundo, a equipe da McKinsey Talks traz hoje uma analogia entre liderança e futebol. Afinal, os melhores treinadores conseguem fazer a diferença mesmo estando constantemente sob condições de alta pressão, risco e incerteza, em um ritmo alucinado de treinos e jogos. Neste episódio, você vai entender como os melhores técnicos de futebol conseguem usar a criatividade para transformar cada momento em uma oportunidade de aprendizado. E como isso é imprescindível para lidar com as novas expectativas da força de trabalho. Para falar mais sobre este tema, está conosco aqui hoje o Carson, sócio em Londres e fundador da Aberkin, braço da McKinsey focado em transformar lideranças. E também ele é um absoluto aficionado de futebol. E por isso hoje a nossa conversa será em inglês. Welcome, Mike. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much. My Portuguese is obviously getting a little better because I understood half of what you said.
That's great.
But my first time in Brazil, unbelievable. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, but we'll keep the English.
Very good idea.
E para transformar as metáforas futebolísticas em exemplos reais do dia a dia das empresas brasileiras, temos também aqui conosco no estúdio o Rami Goldfajn, sócio sênior da McKinsey em São Paulo, líder da prática de pessoas e performance organizacional e um dos responsáveis pela nossa última pesquisa sobre força de trabalho na América Latina. Olá, Rami, bem-vindo também, é um prazer tê-lo aqui conosco hoje.
Prazer todo meu, falar desse tema tão importante e quero esclarecer que eu não sou especialista em futebol, mas gostaria
em liderança, sim.
Em liderança eu posso falar melhor.
Então temos uma ótima combinação aqui, uma ótima dupla. Muito bem. So let's get started. So Mike, we have been talking a lot about why so many people are leaving their jobs. They are searching for better equations between their personal lives and what employers have to offer. We live in a world of high uncertainty, and we are also seeing increasingly higher rates of burnout. So how should we lead in this environment?
It's really tough, isn't it? I mean, uncertainty, we say in England, uncertainty gives birth to more uncertainty. This VUCA world that we're living in seems to be becoming more and more VUCA. How do we lead through it? Of course, there's no simple answer, but with empathy, I think is probably the main thing. I think we need to listen to what people are saying, why they're leaving, and there's a strange balance between you don't want to be selfish in times like this, but you have to look after yourself, and that's a difficult balance to get, both for leaders and for just the working man and woman. It's not easy.
We live in a very challenging world right now, and Brazil has been in that challenging mode for decades, I would say, right? So I think we are used to the. I think Brazilian leaders are more used to VUCA because that happens. That's been happening for a while. Since my first job in the 35 years ago, I remember we had hyperinflation, we had high interest rates, we had political tension and so forth, and that came along through the decades.
So, Rami, you have had a long experience in challenging turnarounds and transformations. Do you identify any default reactions among Brazilian leaders while they deal with these constant unprecedented challenges? You mentioned a little bit of this volatile context and they are more resilient maybe, but do you have anything else that you should highlight?
So I think, as I mentioned, there is this natural more resilience, I would say, and adaptability in Brazilian leaders. But I still see the first reaction. It's always in terms of defensive, and there's still a lot of gap in terms of leaders take a step back and look at it and think how to quickly go from one mode to another, even in Brazil.
And Mike, is there a way how leaders can step out of their default and embrace risk and uncertainty in a different way?
Yes, no, absolutely there is. I think it takes a certain amount of courage, to be honest. So it's all to do with how high are the stakes that we're playing for, and how familiar is the environment to me. So if I'm in a very familiar environment with low stakes, that's like comfort zone, right? And if I'm in a maybe an unfamiliar environment with low stakes, that's learning zone. But as soon as it gets to high stakes, that starts to become terror zone. And in the terror zone, the danger is you don't learn. So the practice of, as you say, taking a step back, this is part of the heart of what we call adaptive leadership or adaptability. Leaders taking a step back, it starts with, Heifetz called it the balcony and the dance. So it's an old-fashioned concept, but it's the idea of, I'm standing on the balcony watching the dancers, or I'm in the dance. But he goes on to say, it's actually about getting on my own balcony. So I look down at myself and I say, how are you doing? How are you doing? That you aren't behaving in the way you used to. Why? What's changed? Why? You're losing sleep. Why? Whatever it is, right? Check in with myself. Because that is the lens through which I'm seeing the world. Then I can compensate for that. And a bit like sailing a boat, you make corrections all the time. I'm watching myself and I'm making corrections. That's a great thing a leader can do, to be adaptable to the circumstances.
Do you have any football examples? So you mentioned dancing, sailing, and how about the football?
So yeah, I'll tell you one that's actually very dear to my heart. I'm a great fan of Manchester City, and Pep Guardiola is, arguably, he's certainly in the top handful of managers, trainers in the world, and he's a brilliant thinker, and his comfort zone is now quite big because he's done a lot. But there was a moment where he took Manchester City to the Champions League final 2 years ago in Porto. I was there, and it was a rough evening for we City fans. What he was out of his comfort zone, right? The stakes was super high, and it was unfamiliar territory with an English team for him. This was a club that had never been there. None of the players had ever been there, not like the Barcelona days. So this is unfamiliar territory. And what he did, the great thing is that the default there for a leader can be to freeze or even to crumble. He did not do that. He sought to be transformational, which is great. And he took a deep breath and he said, what I'm going to do, I'm going to change the team around tonight. We're going to play differently because our opponents, Chelsea, know us from England, from the Premier League. So we're going to make a little change here, which will throw them off the scent. Of course, what actually happened was it threw City off the scent more than it threw Chelsea. And so it actually went wrong. And probably if I have and they lost 1-0. And probably if I have a criticism, how dare I, right? I mean, the man's outstanding. But if I look back with the benefit of hindsight, half-time, the ability then to get on the balcony in the midst of the highest stakes possible for football, get on the balcony and say, this is not working. I'm going to change something. And he didn't do that. But he was very upset afterwards. And he took full responsibility. And this is where, by the way, sorry, just one more thought. This is where actually we come on to this idea of the paradox of adaptability. So the paradox of adaptability says, in these situations, I default to what I know. The very good news is he did not. He tried to do something else. So, well done him. And he learned from it, and that's like bouncing forward. We talk a lot about resilience, which is, can I bounce back? But this is like bouncing forward. So he's learned a lot, and you can see it in the way he's leading the team this year. It's brilliant.
Great analogy. Thanks. And that seems easier to be said than to be done. How can leaders become more adaptive? Is there a way to do it?
Well, I could give maybe an example from my past. I used to where I helped do the change, where I took over a company that was in crisis. As a CEO, the company was in Chapter 11, and when I arrived, as you mentioned, everybody froze. They were focused only on the day-to-day activities and not focused on how to get out of that situation.
I do what I know.
Exactly.
Well.
They were doing what they knew, but nothing that they were doing was going to take them out of the situation they were. And I realized that, and I showed that to them. But of course, that was not enough. So I needed to give the call for action, but also I had to inspire them and help them aspire much more, right? And also help them understand why it was so important for them to build a plan to get out of that situation.
Yes.
And what they had to do personally to achieve this different thinking, right? And one tactic that I used was telling them, listen, a lot of people depend on us, so failure is not an option.
Right.
So knowing that failure is not an option,
yes.
Right? Let's think of the options that we have.
Very good. Very good. Did that work? Did that work?
Yeah.
Yes, it did.
Great.
So listen, and then we need to build a plan, and they didn't know what to do, and then I started to provoke them.
Very good.
And in 15 days, we built a plan which was totally out of the box. I remember your example with Manchester City, totally out of the box, totally different. Nobody thought about it. I didn't even think about it. It was part of the group discussion that came. That took us. That plan was responsible for us to really turn around the situation, make us survive for much more time. Enough for us to sell the company and then to save jobs and continue the economic activity of the company and so forth.
Brilliant. And two observations there, Rami, if I may. One is the failure is not an option thing. We call that in England, we call that burning your boats. So there was the great story about William the Conqueror,
but the boats were already burned.
The boats were burned. Exactly. Exactly.
I just showed them.
You just showed them burned boats.
Exactly.
Yes. No. Exactly right. And the other thing just to observe is the old saying, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." And there's something about people learning. We grow from these times, and we look back at the toughest times. And they're never fun while you're going through them, but we look back and we go, yes, I've learned from that, and we take it forward. So there's always a learning in the madness.
Yeah, I talk to those people frequently, and they say that was probably one of their best experience in life in terms of learning.
There you go.
That's interesting.
And how they grew as a professional.
That's remarkable. Very nice. And is there any story or learning from the football in a similar way?
Yeah, I mean, there is. But there's something, just to loop back to empathy, right, at the beginning.
Sure.
What I find happens in these moments of stress is we can act out of one of two directions. We can act out of fear, or we can act out of love. And those two things are diametrically opposed. So most of our gut reactions in these crisis moments or even in prolonged turbulence, the whole shrinking and all of that, that's fear-based.
Mhm.
That's survival-based. Will I survive? Imagine if we can pause, get onto our balconies, choose not to be in protection, but to be in learning, and choose to come out of love. So the empathy point is, hey, I'm going to act out of love for my people, for my workforce, for my colleagues, for society, for whatever it is that gives me meaning, but I'm going to act out of love. John of Patmos, the great Christian mystic, said, perfect love drives out fear, which is a beautiful thought.
Yeah, it is.
And I, yes, I have some real examples from football. I'll just give you one. The great Carlo Ancelotti, who's now back at Madrid, has had many successful clubs, has won the Champions League many times. A great leader, and he is highly empathetic. And he told me a wonderful story about a South American footballer who played in one of his teams. He was a striker, and he was not scoring goals. And this was difficult. And he said to Carlo, whatever the equivalent was of "sorry, boss, I'll fix it." And Carlo said, "No, tell me what's the matter." And he wouldn't tell him, so he took him out. And this guy said, "Well, they went for a walk together." And the guy said, "Well, I'm getting married." Carlos said, "Congratulations." He said, "No, it's an arranged marriage."
Mm.
He said, "And I don't want it. She doesn't want it, And Carlos said, "Well, in a nice way, what are you going to do about it?" And the guy said, "Well, if you give me 2 weeks off, I'll go home and call it off." Carlos said, "Off you go." So he took 2 weeks off. He went home, stood up for what he believed was right, came back, started scoring goals.
That's a great story.
And Carlo acted out of love, right? He didn't say, "Don't be stupid, give them a phone call and get back in training." 2 weeks off, came back, total transformation. Beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Simple, but easy to go the other way. And if you're a football manager under pressure and you have to win the next game, you want him scoring goals. And when the fans are saying, "Where is he?" and he's back in South America talking to his parents, it's like, really? So it takes courage to do that. And of course, by the way, finally thought, courage has the French word cœur in it, which is heart.
Cœur.
So love and courage are hand in hand.
That's great and
That's
beautiful.
a fantastic story.
Thanks for sharing. That's great. Unfortunately, we are reaching the end of our session today. As a final piece of advice, Mike, what can leaders do when they feel trapped in their default and want to change? You gave us one beautiful story as an example, but maybe you can have another one.
The first thing they've got to do is say, "Look, this isn't working," right? I'm trapped in my default. It's not working. At that stage, fear can kick in, and we want fear not to kick in. So at this stage, I want to bring in your great Brazilian Formula One driver, the great Ayrton Senna, who said words to this effect: "When it's raining, I can overtake 15 cars. When it's sunny, I can't." It's a lovely reframe, right? When it seems to all be going wrong, it's when the going gets tough, the tough get going, right? When it all seems to be going wrong, the person with the creative response, the person who comes from a place of possibility, who comes from this place of love, that's the reframe that will win. So if you're caught in your default and it's not working, go to Ayrton Senna.
Exactly. And you find an opportunity in the crisis.
Absolutely. Opportunity in the crisis. Perfect.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Rami, do you want to add anything else or leave a final message to our audience?
Yes, I think one thought here is maturity and self-awareness of leaders, but also be open for vulnerability and share your feelings with your team and ask for their feelings as well, right? That will bring, in my experience, better connections, right? And by the way, from the research that we had, one of the reasons people are wants to leave their job is because they are not inspired by their leaders.
Right.
And potentially one of the reasons is because their leaders are very high up, not open, and etc. So this is a way also not only to connect with those people, but also inspire them as well, and in parallel make them more effective. In terms of
Beautiful point.
I have this series in TV that I'm watching. You know Ted Lasso?
Oh yeah.
It's a fantastic. It's
Everyone
a
is
fantastic
talking about
metaphor
it.
for what we're talking. And so it's a random, American coach that goes and coaches a British team, and he doesn't know anything about soccer, but he knows a lot about coaching and creating team environment, and he's very vulnerable. And then he incentivized that, and slowly he's building and renewing the culture of the team. And so, very interesting metaphor for what we've just been talking. Very interesting.
Perfect.
Brilliant.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Rami.
Well, thank you very much, Mike and Humby, for this conversation. It was fantastic. So it was a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you.
A pleasure. Thank you very
Rami.
much. And thank you,
Cheers,
Mike,
man.
for being here.
Great to be here.
Muito obrigada também a você que nos acompanha em vídeo e em podcast. Para entrar em contato com nossos especialistas, o nosso e-mail é mckinsey-talks@mckinsey.com. Você também pode nos enviar perguntas, participe! E a agenda completa do McKinsey Talks está lá no mckinseytalks.com. E você pode também conferir lá este episódio e os anteriores em vídeo ou em podcast. É isso aí, muito obrigada e até a próxima!